Hello my fellow strawmen and welcome back to the Fields of Hay. In today's video I'd like to address some of the arguments made by one of the most popular Christian apologists of today, one Dr. William Lane Craig. There's much I disagree with him on, from the Kalam to God to evolution. To start, we'll look at some of his claims around the question, what is the best evidence that God created the universe?
What is the single most significant physical evidence that a creator God has created our universe? I think that the most important physical evidence for the existence of a creator of the universe is the remarkable discovery that the universe is not eternal in the past but began to exist.
Way to start out with a mischaracterization of the Big Bang. See, the Big Bang Theory says that the universe was once in an extremely hot, dense state. It says absolutely nothing about that hot, dense state emerging from some kind of state of nothingness. The Big Bang was a moment of transition, not creation.
Up until the 20th century, the prevailing viewpoint among both philosophers and scientists was that the universe is eternal, that matter and energy have always existed, that the universe never began to exist, and therefore it seemed there was no need for a creator of the universe.
He is correct. The past infinity of the existence of matter and energy seems to be a logical following of the first law of thermodynamics.
That worldview crumbled under the impact of Albert Einstein's general theory of relativity and its application in 1917 to the questions of cosmology. What Einstein's theory predicted was that the universe cannot be a static, eternal, in effect, timeless entity. Rather, the universe is either going to be in a state of a cosmic expansion or collapse. And in either case, this cannot be extrapolated to past infinity.
It hardly crumbled. Anyone who understood the second law would know that events could not have been happening in an eternal regress, even while the first law would imply an eternal regress in the existence of the energy that would go into those events. Already there was this hint that the events we see around us now could not have been going on for past infinity. And for the universe to be eternal, it must have had some primordial state which transitioned into the event-filled universe we find ourselves in. The fact is, relativity can be used to trace back the universe to an extremely hot, dense state, under which it's known to break down. We cannot use it to extrapolate further what caused the Big Bang, and so it fails to contradict what we already know from thermodynamics.
It predicted that the universe, indeed time and space themselves, must have had a beginning at some point in the finite past. During the 1920s, observational astronomy began to uncover evidence for these purely theoretical predictions that Albert Einstein's theory had made.
Relativity may very well conclude some sort of beginning of space and time, but that doesn't matter. We know that general relativity will break down under the extreme conditions of the early universe, because our other best theory, quantum mechanics, would also be applicable and is in disagreement with relativity. So while Einstein may point us towards a primordial state of the universe a finite time ago, it is a misuse of his theory to say that such a state came into being out of nothingness.
So that today the prevailing view among contemporary cosmologists and astrophysicists is that the universe is not in fact infinite in the past, but that time and space, matter and energy are finite and came into being at some point a finite time ago. And I think this is the most powerful evidence ever to come out of science for the existence of a transcendent cause of the universe which brought the universe into being.
Nope. Every physicist I know is somewhere along the lines of time breaks down, or there was no before, or we don't really know. No one both concludes creatio ex nihilo and can back up why that conclusion is warranted. Even Georges Lemaitre, the Catholic priest and theoretical physicist who first proposed the Big Bang, held his beliefs in creation as entirely separate from, and neither supported nor rebutted by, the Big Bang. Craig comes so close to understanding and yet so far. He is correct to say that something caused the Big Bang. What that something is, whether some previous event or simply an intrinsic property of matter, I can't say, but for some reason Craig thinks this cause must be transcendent. He hasn't properly ruled out the possibility of a pre-existing state. All he's done is treat Einstein's relativity the same way he treats his Bible, as unerring fact. He couldn't make a worse mistake. So that's it for the Big Bang. Let's hear what Craig's production team has to say about math.
Why does mathematics work?
Math works because it is a description of reality. We humans purpose-built a language called math, which was designed to logically parallel the things we discover about reality. It works because reality is self-consistent, and so the precise and logical wording of equations is incredibly adept at paralleling reality. It has limitations, though. In particular, premises can be wrong. Perhaps the way we think something works isn't accurate to reality, and so we come up with bad equations. Coming up with some mathematical statement does not force the universe into making that statement true. At best, accurate premises can lead to incredibly precise and testable predictions.
Think about it. Mathematical entities like numbers, sets, and equations are non-physical and abstract. They can't cause anything. Yet, for some reason, the physical universe operates mathematically.
The reason is because the universe operates, and so math can be made to describe that operation. It really isn't that difficult. There is nothing supernatural going on.
Science relies on the assumption that we live in an ordered universe that is subject to precise mathematical laws.
Here, let me correct that. Science relies on the assumption that we live in an ordered universe. Then physical laws can be described which use precise definitions to accurately reflect reality. And let's not forget that this assumption is entirely falsifiable. If the universe turns out to be unordered, we should see evidence of that chaos at any moment. Cows should start flying, popcorn should turn to gold. You know, the unusual.
For example, Pythagoras discovered that when a vibrating string is shortened by half, it plays the same note one octave higher. Isaac Newton's observations led to his discovery of the law of gravity, a mathematical relationship expressed as a simple equation that enabled us to enter the space age. Mathematics enabled astronomers to pinpoint the location of a previously undiscovered planet. And James Clerk Maxwell used mathematics to predict the existence of radio waves. Albert Einstein, working with theoretical mathematics developed 50 years earlier, formulated his general theory of relativity, a pillar of modern physics. His calculations were later confirmed during a solar eclipse, when Arthur Eddington observed light from distant stars bending around the sun. Then, Peter Higgs used mathematical equations to predict the existence of an elementary particle. It took 48 years, billions of dollars, and millions of man-hours for experimental scientists to finally detect the Higgs boson.
In none of these cases does reality follow from the math. In every case, the math is described to fit the reality the mathematicians found. Even in cases of prediction, patterns were found and then extrapolated to help us find things we weren't aware of before. The pattern of gravity was described based on the paths traced by the celestial bodies, and an unexpected wobble in one of them allowed us to extrapolate the existence of Neptune. Maxwell understood how charges acted in magnetic and electric fields and extrapolated to electromagnetic waves. Einstein saw fundamental patterns in the invariance of the speed of light and the equivalence of accelerating frames of reference, and came up with an extrapolation that predicted the bending of light around the sun, amongst other things. He didn't just sit in an armchair all day and suddenly realize that math meant black holes existed. Reality determined that math, he just found the logical conclusion. And finally, Higgs took patterns in the results of nuclear and particle experiments and described them well enough to understand the consequence of such patterns to be a mass-giving boson. Yes, it's all very impressive, but it isn't miraculous.
How do we explain the astonishing applicability of math to the physical world?
By realizing that the concepts we find in math are all defined by concepts we find in the physical world. We invent the language to describe the reality we discover. If that description is any good, we can read the universe like a book and uncover its secrets.
In 1960, the Nobel Prize-winning physicist and mathematician Eugene Wigner published an article that stunned the scientific community entitled "The Unreasonable Effectiveness of Mathematics in the Natural Sciences." Wigner concluded that the effectiveness of mathematics is a miracle, which we neither understand nor deserve.
I actually went and read this paper, and I can't say I'm convinced. Wigner argues that we should not expect the universe to fit so precisely with simple mathematical laws. But in his argument, he only points to examples of people taking patterns they only partly understood, applying similar patterns for math, and finding insight into and agreement with the real world. I don't understand why he thinks this is unexpected without a designer. To me, reality must be some singular, consistent way. It couldn't exist in an inconsistent state. I'm willing to take this as a brute fact because it must hold true in all explanations. Even if God were to exist, they too would have to exist in some self-consistent state. So even though I have no metaphysical grounding for why the universe is consistent, I'm willing to accept that it is. From there, the ability of math to reflect aspects of nature is as good as our ability to describe the relationships we find in it. But to go from "I don't know why the universe is consistent" to "nature should be inconsistent and mathematically indescribable, and it's a miracle that it isn't, and so a designer must exist," this is far too big a leap. I don't consider it a miracle for me not to understand something. I consider it a miracle if something which I understand to be impossible happens anyway.
Why is mathematics so effective?
I hate to sound like a broken record, but I do want to emphasize this going into the next section. It's because math is purpose-built to be effective at the role of describing reality.
Philosophers who address this question fall into two camps. Naturalists, who believe that all that exists concretely is space-time and its physical contents. They exclude supernatural causes. And theists, who believe in a God who created the universe. Naturalists cannot provide a reasonable explanation for why mathematics applies to the physical world. It's just a happy coincidence.
I certainly don't put forth the idea that it's a happy coincidence. I've been very explicit that my explanation is that math is effective because it's a description of reality. If you want to dig deeper into why reality is uniform and consistent, then I don't know. I know that it is, but I don't know why. This is not a miracle because I'm a dumb, stupid human who should be expected not to know at least some things.
But this explanation is unsatisfactory for two reasons. First, a great deal of mathematics and science cannot be physically realized. For example, imaginary numbers and infinite dimensional spaces. Although these concepts are useful, physical reality cannot possibly have the structure they describe.
Why can't physical reality possibly have the structure math describes? This is only an argument from intuition, but no reason is provided why it is contradictory to think that the universe could naturally be mathematically consistent. The examples given weren't backed up. I know for a fact that rotations correspond well with imaginary numbers. I don't know about the infinite dimensional spaces, but I cannot say on intuition alone that there is nothing in reality which corresponds with them.
And second, this answer still doesn't explain why the physical universe has such a stunningly elegant mathematical structure.
Fair, I cannot say why reality has this property, but neither can the theists. How did God go about putting these laws into place? What underlying metaphysical structure did God provide to reality that allowed it to be mathematically consistent? Saying that God did it holds exactly zero explanatory power, so to be unsatisfied with my lack of an answer is entirely hypocritical.
By contrast, for theists, mathematics works so well in the physical world because God has chosen to create the world according to the plan he had in mind.
If it's so impressive that math works in the physical world, then how impressive is it that God works in no world? Seriously, before any worlds existed, how did God exist in such a fashion as to be able to plan and create math and reality? Isn't that far more mind-boggling than the simple elegance of math? So when I hear a theist say that math works because God did it, all I hear is an avoidance of the question. Sure, you technically give an answer, but you immediately spawn a far worse question.
The first-century Jewish philosopher Philo of Alexandria offered this analogy. When a king wants to build a city, a trained architect first designs in his mind a plan of all the parts of the city that are to be completed. Then he begins to construct the city out of stones and timber, looking at the model and ensuring that the material objects are built according to the plan. Mathematics and physics work so well together because the same mind that designed the universe on a mathematical model also built the universe on the same mathematical model.
Sure, when you assume an analogy that explicitly includes a designer, the analogy will point to the universe being designed. But what about how mountains are built? Do the convective plumes in the mantle conspire to push India north? Or is it possible for things to occur without a mind to guide them? What about all the uninhabitable worlds? What plans did God draw up that involved putting one incredible life-bearing planet here, and leaving countless around us too hot or too big or too unstable for life to exist? If the universe is analogous to a city in which every block is designed, then what about the unfathomably large swaths of lifeless space that take up most of the universe?
All of this adds up to an argument for the existence of God that goes like this. If God does not exist, the applicability of mathematics is just a happy coincidence. But the applicability of mathematics is not just a happy coincidence. Therefore, God exists.
I'll agree to statement 2, but statement 1 has not been demonstrated. If God doesn't exist, I can account for the applicability of math perfectly well by the fact that it was invented by very intelligent apes to describe the world around them. You can really tell premise 1 is serious when it uses words like just and happy. Those aren't there to emotionally manipulate you, no! And of course, if you take them out, the claim is that the applicability of math is a coincidence. Okay, so why is it that a godless universe cannot be mathematical except by coincidence? This premise is asserted, not demonstrated. And moving on to our final clip for today from one of Craig's videos on the fine-tuning argument.
Scientists have come to realize a startling truth. The universe looks suspiciously like a fix.
Is that why their demographic group is less likely than anyone to believe in God? Seems strange.
A staggering list of initial conditions began to emerge, all of which were incomprehensibly fine-tuned to allow intelligent life.
Probability is determined by calculating how many outcomes meet some condition out of how many possible. If there are 6 marbles possible to draw from a bag and 2 are red, then there's a 2 in 6 chance of drawing a red marble. The fine-tuning argument is a probabilistic one, and yet if you listen closely, you'll never hear how improbable our existence is. No proper calculation is ever offered.
Consider the force of gravity. If the gravitational constant had been out of tune by just 1 part, in 10 to the 60th power, devastation would have ensued.
And what is the probability of a natural universe falling within that range? I don't know. I don't have access to other universes with other gravitational constants for me to set up that ratio of how many universes have life out of how many exist. Nor do I have access to the mechanism by which the gravitational constant was set, so I can't even calculate a theoretical chance. All Craig has to offer is a relative variation. He implies that because the constant could not be different by more than 1 part in 10 to the 60 from our value without devastation, then the probability of gravity allowing for life is 1 in 10 to the 60. But it isn't. Relative variation is not the same thing as probability. If you disagree, then consider that a less stringent constant, one which could hypothetically vary by 1 part in 1, would guarantee a 1 out of 1 chance that the universe develops life. No universe could have a constant outside the life-permitting range. Or worse, if this hypothetical constant could vary by 2 parts in 1 before precluding life, then it would imply a 200% chance that any universe would allow for life. It's utter nonsense. Be wary of when these incredibly precise numbers are thrown out, because they are misleading and in fact have nothing to do with a proper calculation of the probability of constants taking on a particular value.
The universe would have either expanded so rapidly that no stars could form, or else collapsed back in upon itself with the same result. No stars, no planets, no life.
What if the gravitational constant is linked to the strength of inflation in a way we don't understand yet, but which guarantees star formation? What if gravity can take on any value, and the universe be flat and hospitable to life regardless? The fact remains, we do not understand the mechanism by which the gravitational constant came to be what it is, and so we cannot speak to the probability that it does not preclude life.
Or what about the distribution of the matter and energy in the early universe? If these were not evenly distributed to an unthinkable precision, then the universe would have been hostile to life of any kind.
And what if a natural mechanism exists by which the universe must begin at its lowest possible entropy? What if the probability of landing in this precise state is exactly 1 because none of the other states are allowed? The 1 in 10 to the 10 to the 120 is a big scary number and completely irrelevant. It's an exquisite misdirection that any magician could be proud of.
The fact that the universe is fine-tuned for life is uncontroversial.
No, it isn't.
Yes, it is. No, it isn't.
I controverse it.
How then does one best explain this incomprehensible fine-tuning? There are 3 live options: physical necessity, chance, or design.
I disagree with the premise, but for the sake of discussion, let's say the universe is in fact fine-tuned. Wouldn't God also be fine-tuned, as indicated by his alleged perfection? Wouldn't he be the most fine-tuned thing possible? Shouldn't these same 3 options and their critiques apply to God as well?
The hypothesis of physical necessity says that the universe must be fine-tuned for life. A universe which is hostile to life is impossible, it said.
I don't think that dead universes are impossible. I'm saying that I don't know what the likelihood is, nor do I know how many living or dead universes should exist beyond this one, so I can't take it as a miracle that ours contains life.
However, not only is a life-prohibiting universe possible, a universe without life is far more likely Each of the parameters that governs the universe can take on a wide range of values, thus reinforcing the improbability of fine-tuning.
Craig says that the constants can take on a wide range of values. Can they? How does he know? There's a difference between being able to take on other values in concept and in actuality. I know we can imagine different values, but how do we know that they could actually be different? Even granting that they can vary in ways that prevent life, we don't know how likely they are to fall within the range we know to support life. And even granting that natural mechanisms are unlikely to support life as we know it, that doesn't answer about life in general. What if a universe which prohibits earthly life is quite comfortable to some other form?
Moreover, the multiverse faces a devastating objection. If we were just a random member of a multiverse, then we could explain away all sorts of improbabilities in our everyday lives. We shouldn't be surprised when the roulette wheel continually lands on the red 20. After all, the math implies that this is happening somewhere without foul play in the multiverse, so why not here?
I wasn't going to address the multiverse stuff because it is irrelevant to my stance. But the theme of the series is apologists not understanding things, and boy did Craig misunderstand probabilities. This one improbable event of continual 20s should be a needle in a haystack. One world among trillions should see this happen to them. On the other hand, I would expect cheaters to exist on most every world that invents gambling and roulette, who would happily program winning streaks into the wheel. If a casino sees somebody getting too lucky, then they have every right to throw them out. One improbable thing happening does not make other improbable things more likely. So even if our universe is life-supporting by an unfathomably unlikely chance, it would not mean that roulette wheels should start rolling 20s. So to summarize, I disagree with Craig. Neither necessity nor chance have been ruled out as possibilities. Meanwhile, Craig has done nothing to anticipate or answer my objection that a designer, should they exist, must be at least as fine-tuned as what they designed. To put it simply, who designed God? And if he has no designer, nor exists out of chance, but by necessity, then why him and not a handful of constants? Why not a mathematically describable universe? I don't think Craig or any theist has the answers. Maybe some tome has them hidden away somewhere. All the more reason to go read a fucking book.